They say that when you die, you see a light. But what if that light is only the beginning? In the final seconds of your life, what does the soul actually see for centuries? We've been told death is the end, but a sleeping man once saw something else. His name was Edgar Cayce. They called him the sleeping prophet because in deep trance, he described what most never dared to speak. What happens after the final breath? He spoke of light, but also of sound, of memory, and of a world that begins the moment this one ends. Cayce believed the soul doesn't die. It remembers. Some say the tunnel, the light, the visions are just tricks of the brain. Others, like Cayce, believe they are truths waiting to be remembered. What do you believe? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's walk together into the last 3 seconds. But if the soul doesn't vanish, then where does it go? What does it truly experience once it's freed from this fragile shell of flesh and time? These are not just poetic questions. They are echoes that haunted humanity long before science could even define consciousness. And yet, over a century ago, one man, while in a sleeping state, claimed to have seen that realm. His name was Edgar Cayce. To those who studied him, he wasn't just a healer or mystic. He was a bridge between the seen and the unseen, nicknamed the Sleeping Prophet. Cayce entered deep trances where he accessed what he called the Akashic Records, a dimension of soul memory. From that space, he described in calm, exact language what happens in the moments after death. Not speculation, not metaphor, but direct transmissions, as if the soul was speaking through him. He spoke of the soul reviewing its entire life, like a ripple of light across memory. He spoke of meeting beings of light, of hearing sounds beyond human comprehension. He spoke of love, not as emotion, but as vibration. He said, "Death is not the end. It is the opening of a door into greater awareness." And he wasn't alone. Thousands who've returned from near-death experiences, some separated by oceans, languages, religions, have described the same journey: a brief darkness, followed by overwhelming light, a moment of silence, then a sudden remembering. Cayce believed that in the moment of death, we don't lose ourselves, we meet ourselves, not who we pretended to be, but who we've always been beneath fear, guilt, and noise. And maybe that's why the idea of those final 3 seconds feels so mysterious, not because they hide the truth, but because they reveal it. So let me ask you something, just between us. If your soul could whisper something to you in the moment before everything fades, what do you think it would say? Go ahead, pause, reflect, and if something stirs inside you, drop it in the comments. Someone else might need to hear it too. So if Cayce was right, if death is not the end but a return, then what truly unfolds in those last fleeting seconds? When the body falls silent and the world begins to slip away like smoke through trembling fingers. He spoke of these moments not as endings, but as a sacred unraveling, a spiral of remembrance so delicate yet so profound that even time itself hesitates. According to Cayce, the soul doesn't vanish, it awakens. And in that awakening, time bends, stretches, and finally collapses. It begins in silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness. A vast inner pause where the self becomes weightless. Then comes memory, not a sequence, but a wave, rushing in all at once. In the first second, the soul is submerged in its own story. But this is no ordinary memory. It is memory illuminated by meaning. You see not only what you've done, but what it meant, the kindness you forgot you gave, the words you wish you hadn't spoken, the moments when you could have loved but chose fear, all of it reappears. Not to shame you, but to bring light to the parts of you that remained hidden. Cayce once said, "You will see your life pass before you not to judge, but to understand. And in that understanding, you feel something shift. You are no longer the actor, but the witness, no longer confined to the name you carried or the roles you played, but expanded into something timeless. You begin to realize you were never separate. You were never alone." In the second, Cayce said, "The soul enters the space of reunion, not fantasy, not hallucination, but recognition. You meet those whose energy has touched yours before a mother's gaze, a friend's embrace, a soul whose journey was intertwined with yours long before you met. Some may be from your life just ended, others from lives you've forgotten, but the connection is instant, like a warmth remembered from a dream you thought you lost." Cayce described this not as appearance, but as presence. Those you failed to forgive, he said, will stand beside you not in punishment, but in love. There is no room for guilt here, only return, and in that presence, the soul begins to shed its final weight, regret, fear, resistance. It doesn't happen all at once. It's more like melting, the slow dissolving of all the barriers you thought protected you but only ever kept you from yourself. Then, in the third second, the threshold, the light, but not the kind you see with eyes. Cayce said it's not something you walk toward, but something that emerges from within. For some, it embraces. For others, it waits. It does not judge. It simply responds. And Cayce warned not all souls step into that light. Some remain near the earth, their frequency still clinging to the density of old pain, unresolved stories, or identities too tightly held. It is not a tunnel, he said, not a place. It is a frequency. This is the great truth many miss. Where you go is not dictated by belief, but by resonance. The soul is not dragged forward, it rises. If it's ready, and if not, it stays not out of punishment, but out of alignment. In that final second, the soul doesn't escape the world. It remembers that it was never trapped by it. The world doesn't abandon the soul simply lets go of its illusions. And what's left is light, not an escape, a return. But once the final veil is lifted, once the soul stands at the edge of the light, a deeper question emerges. Why do some hesitate, while others rise? What causes certain souls to linger near the earth, caught in a kind of echo? Cayce never described this as punishment, nor did he invoke the language of hellfire or wrath. Instead, he spoke of vibration not as symbolism, but as the very substance of what remains when the body dissolves. He believed that the universe itself is built on frequency, that everything hums with intention, and the soul is no exception. After death, what's left is not your body, not your name, but your resonance, the emotional imprint of a lifetime, shaped by your choices, your fears, your capacity to love. The light, Cayce said, doesn't reject anyone. It simply mirrors your state of being. Where you go, he wrote, is determined not by belief, but by the frequency of your being. If you lived in fear, control, or bitterness, your soul vibrates slower, not as a punishment, but as a natural result of weight, and heavy things don't ascend. But if your life leaned toward awareness, even imperfectly, if you cultivated forgiveness, curiosity, gratitude, Your field is lighter, more aligned with the current that carries the soul forward. This is why some, even after death, remain in a space that feels stuck, dense, or strangely familiar. They haven't crossed, not because they're denied, but because they're still clinging to a wound, a title, a grief that was never fully released. Cayce believed that many of these souls choose to return not out of obligation, but because they are drawn back by their own unfinished symphony. He described life not as a test, but as a lesson plan. And death, it's the teacher returning your notes, gently asking, did you understand what you were trying to learn? You may have crossed paths with a soul still remembering an old child, a young elder, someone who carries a sadness they've never spoken aloud. Perhaps you felt it too, the weight of something ancient, as if you were sent here to heal a story that didn't begin with you. Cayce called this vibrational memory karma not as punishment, but as resonance. He taught that every small act of reflection, every pause to breathe consciously, every decision to forgive, even when no one is watching, becomes a shift in frequency. It is this shift that frees you, not just in life, but beyond it. So maybe the real question isn't, will I reach the light, but am I living in harmony with what light truly is? And if that question stirs something inside you, maybe it's time to ask the one beneath it. What story are you still carrying? That might be too heavy to rise. Let us know in the comments, not for validation, but because sometimes speaking, it is the first step towards setting it down. Once the soul releases its grip, when it finally surrenders the weight it once called identity, a different kind of unfolding begins. What happens to those who rise not because they were perfect, but because they were ready? Cayce never described this as reward, and certainly not as heaven in any traditional sense. Instead, he spoke of a state so expansive, so luminous, that words like place or afterlife simply fall short. He said that when the soul crosses into the light, it doesn't disappear, it blooms. It remembers what it forgot. It reclaims its original shape, one not defined by age, name, or trauma, but by essence. The light, to Cayce, was not a destination. It was a vibration, a state of being in which time ceases to be linear and the soul is no longer a character in a story, but the story itself. He spoke of realms beyond the veil where souls do not rest in sleep, but enter a deeper form of awareness. These are not heavens of reward, but sanctuaries of reflection. There, the soul reviews, chooses, prepares. Some souls decide to return not out of karmic debt, but from a longing to serve, to complete, to illuminate something left unfinished. Others move on, into dimensions where learning is no longer born from contrast, but from harmony, where intention is music, and thought becomes form. Cayce described these places not in doctrine, but in metaphor, light in motion, unity beyond memory. And perhaps his most surprising revelation was this: the light doesn't belong only to the dying. It surrounds us always in stillness, in surrender, in the split second between reaction and awareness. We touch it in meditation. We glimpse it in grief. We carry it, often unknowingly, in the way we love. So maybe the point was never to reach the light, but to become the kind of presence through which the light can shine. And if that's true, then the question isn't what happens after I die, but what am I doing with the light I already carry? If any part of this resonates, leave a thought below, not just for you, but for someone who might need to remember that the light was never far. If the light is not something we arrive at, but something we remember then, What exactly is it showing us when we stand before it? Cayce often said that death is not an exit, but a mirror. And in that mirror, we don't see angels or gods first. We see ourselves, not the version we performed for the world, but the silent truth we carried beneath it all. And perhaps that's the most intimate moment in the soul's journey, not when it escapes the body, but when it finally sees what the body was hiding in this mirror of light. Nothing is exaggerated and nothing is erased. Every forgotten kindness, every unspoken regret, every intention behind every word, it all becomes visible, not to shame us, but to reflect the blueprint we wrote before we were born. Cayce believed that we choose our lives, our lessons, even our wounds, not as punishment, but as pathways to remembering who we are. And so the light doesn't judge, it simply reveals. And what it reveals is whether we lived as the soul intended, or whether we got lost in the noise of the world. This reflection is neither cruel nor comforting. It is clarifying. It shows you the spaces where love flowed, and the corners where it was withheld. And in that clarity, something beautiful happens. Forgiveness begins, not just for others, but for the self. Cayce spoke of this moment as sacred, not because it grants salvation, but because it offers truth. And truth is the beginning of freedom. Some souls, upon seeing themselves fully, feel a profound peace. Others feel a pull, a desire to return and try again. This time with more presence, more courage, more love. Either way, the mirror does not lie. It does not flatter. It does not punish. It simply shows you what you became and asks, softly, was it true to who you are? And maybe that's the only real question in the end. Maybe that's the light's final gift, not an answer, but a reflection deep enough to bring us home. And after the mirror fades, after the soul sees itself not through eyes, but through light, something quiet begins, a silence, not of emptiness, but of recognition, a soft knowing that doesn't come from books or belief, but from deep inside the breath of being. Cayce believed that in this moment, the soul is closer to truth than ever before, not because it found answers, but because it dropped the need to ask. And maybe that's the real destination, not the light itself, but the stillness that allows it to rise within. The truth is, you don't have to die to meet that moment. You don't have to wait for your final breath to remember who you've always been, because that mirror, it's here in every pause, in every act of presence, in every time you choose to listen instead of react, to forgive instead of fight, to open instead of armor. That light Cayce spoke of, it's not just waiting beyond this life, it's speaking to you now, through intuition, through longing, through the subtle ache that whispers. There's more to you than what the world sees. And maybe that's why you're here, watching this, reading this, feeling this, not by accident, but because some part of your soul is ready to remember. So take a breath not just in your lungs, but in your spirit. Take a moment not to rush forward, but to come home. You don't need to chase the light. You are not separate from it. You never were. The only question is, are you ready to see yourself as you truly are? If something stirred in you today, don't let it fade. Leave a comment, even a single word that captures what your soul wants to remember. And if you feel called, share this with someone whose light might be flickering in the dark, because sometimes it only takes one reflection to awaken everything.